What really happened during the Korean War? The truth is far more shocking and disturbing than what you ever imagined. Are you ready to uncover the dark secrets and unspeakable horrors that were hidden from the world for decades? In this video, we will dive into the unspeakable things that happened during the Korean War. Don't forget to click subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. The Korean War was a military conflict that took place between 1950 and 1953 on the Korean peninsula in East Asia. It began on June 25, 1950, when North Korean forces crossed the 38th parallel, which had been established as the boundary between North and South Korea after World War II. The conflict was sparked by tensions between the Communist government of North Korea, which was backed by the Soviet Union and China, and the Democratic government of South Korea, which was supported by the United States and other Western powers. The North Koreans sought to reunify Korea under communist rule, while the South Koreans aimed to maintain their independence and democracy. The war quickly escalated into a major international conflict, with large-scale military operations involving both ground and air forces. The United States led a United Nations coalition to support South Korea, while China and the Soviet Union supported North Korea. The war also involved significant civilian casualties and resulted in the displacement of millions of people. The conflict ended on July 27, 1953, with the signing of an armistice agreement that established a demilitarized zone between North and South Korea. However, the war officially remains ongoing, as no peace treaty was ever signed. The division of Korea into North and South has had lasting political, economic, and social implications for the region and the world. The Bodo League Massacre was a series of mass killings that took place in South Korea during the early stages of the Korean War. The Bodo League was a social organization that had been established in 1949 to promote land reform and other progressive policies in rural areas. However, the organization was also perceived as having communist sympathies, and South Korean forces targeted many of its members during the war. In July and August of 1950, as the war was just beginning, South Korean forces began rounding up suspected communists and Bodo League members in rural areas. Those who were captured were often subjected to brutal treatment, including torture and summary executions. The killings continued throughout the summer and into the fall of 1950, with an estimated 100,000 people being executed by South Korean forces. The victims included not only Bodo League members, but also suspected communist sympathizers, political prisoners, and civilians who were caught in the crossfire. The exact number of victims is difficult to determine, as many bodies were buried in mass graves or simply left to decay in the countryside. However, it is estimated that tens of thousands of people were killed during the Bodo League Massacre. The killings were not widely known at the time, as the South Korean government kept the details of the massacre hidden from the public. However, the truth eventually came to light, and the massacre is now recognized as one of the worst atrocities of the Korean War. During the Korean War, both North Korean and South Korean forces engaged in widespread abuses against prisoners of war. These abuses included torture, forced labor, starvation, and executions. North Korean forces were known for their particularly harsh treatment of prisoners of war. Many American and South Korean prisoners of war were subjected to brutal physical and psychological abuse, with many dying from starvation, disease, and other forms of mistreatment. Some were even used as human shields or forced to work in dangerous conditions. South Korean forces were also responsible for a number of abuses against prisoners of war, including torture, summary executions, and forced labor. Many of these abuses were committed against suspected communist sympathizers, and some were carried out by right-wing paramilitary groups that were aligned with the South Korean military. The treatment of prisoners of war during the Korean War was a violation of international law, and both North Korea and South Korea were criticized by the international community for their actions. The treatment of American prisoners of war by North Korea, in particular, became a major point of controversy and was a factor in the breakdown of negotiations to end the war. The Korean War, which lasted from 1950 to 1953, resulted in the displacement of millions of people, with many forced to flee their homes and become refugees. The war was fought between North Korea, which was supported by China and the Soviet Union, and South Korea, which was backed by a United Nations coalition led by the United States. As the conflict intensified, many civilians found themselves caught in the crossfire or targeted by military forces. Both North and South Korea engaged in the forced relocation of civilians, as well as the destruction of homes and villages. The situation was particularly dire in North Korea, where the war had caused widespread destruction and displacement. Many North Koreans fled to the countryside or to nearby countries such as China and Russia, while others were forced into labor camps or prisons. In South Korea, the situation was somewhat better, but still difficult. The country was heavily militarized and many civilians were forced to relocate to escape the fighting. The South Korean government also implemented a series of policies to control the movement of people, including a curfew and restrictions on travel. The displacement of civilians had a profound impact on Korean society and culture. Families were separated, communities were destroyed, and many people were left with no homes or means of support. The trauma of displacement also had lasting effects on the mental and physical health of those affected. Today, the legacy of the Korean War continues to be felt, with the issue of refugees and displacement remaining a major concern. Efforts are underway to provide support and assistance to those who were displaced during the conflict, as well as to address the underlying causes of displacement and conflict in the region. The Korean War not only resulted in loss of human lives, but also caused extensive damage to cultural and historical sites, many of which were destroyed intentionally by both sides. North Korean forces, in particular, were known for their destruction of cultural and historical landmarks in South Korea. In 1950, they bombed and burned the Namdaemun Gate, one of the most iconic symbols of Korean architecture and history, located in the heart of Seoul. They also destroyed many other cultural sites, including temples, palaces, and museums. In retaliation, South Korean forces also destroyed several cultural and historical sites in North Korea, including ancient temples and palaces. One of the most significant losses was the destruction of the ancient city of Pyongyang during the fighting. The destruction of cultural and historical sites was not only a loss for Korea but also for the world. Many of these landmarks had significant historical and cultural value and were important symbols of Korean identity and heritage. The loss of these sites has had a lasting impact on Korean culture and society. In recent years, there have been efforts to rebuild and restore some of the cultural and historical sites that were destroyed during the war. The Namdaemun Gate, for example, was rebuilt in 2013, while other cultural sites are being reconstructed or preserved as part of ongoing efforts to promote Korean culture and history. The United States military used a variety of weapons, including napalm and other chemical agents, to devastating effect. Napalm is a type of incendiary weapon that causes extensive burns and can ignite anything it touches. It was used extensively during the war to destroy enemy positions and civilian infrastructure, including homes, schools, and hospitals. The use of napalm caused widespread destruction and resulted in many civilian casualties. In addition to napalm, the United States also used other chemical agents during the war, including tear gas and other forms of poison gas. These chemicals were used to disorient and incapacitate enemy troops, but they also had a devastating impact on civilians. In some cases, entire villages were exposed to these chemicals, resulting in widespread illness and death. The use of napalm and other chemical weapons during the Korean War has had a lasting impact on the people of Korea. Many survivors of the war continue to suffer from the physical and psychological effects of these weapons, and the use of chemical weapons remains a controversial and sensitive issue in Korean society. The use of chemical weapons during the Korean War also had a wider impact on international law and the conduct of war. The widespread use of napalm and other chemical agents led to the development of new international conventions and regulations governing the use of these weapons in conflict. The legacy of the Korean War has played an important role in shaping modern attitudes towards the use of chemical weapons and the need to protect civilians during times of war. I hope this video is productive for you all. Thank you for watching the video. Please subscribe to the channel for more videos.